Hey, my friends, welcome back to a new episode of Storytellers and Wild Creatives. I'm your host, Sage Adderley, and today I have the beautiful Cynthia Hauk with me as my special guest. We're going to have a chitty chat conversation that you're invited to. My friend Cynthia, how are you doing?
I'm so well. I'm excited to be here and chat with you. Yeah.
Yes. So before we jump into it, I want to share Cynthia's bio because she is amazing. I want to let you know like how I feel about Cynthia's work and why she's here and why I really wanted to have this podcast with her. So, Cynthia is founder of Mindful Creative Muse, loves combining art with mindfulness to help you handle stress, love yourself more, and get creative in as little as 5 minutes. She also teaches artists, art teachers, yoga teachers, mindfulness practitioners, and art therapists how to create and share powerful classes through her internationally accredited mindful art teacher training. Not impressive at all, Cynthia. Just not impressive at all. It's so amazing. Since 2007, Cynthia has traveled worldwide, inspiring people in over 50 countries with her workshops, retreats, and training sessions online. Yeah, so stoked to have you here, Cynthia.
I'm so excited for our creative chat.
So, the reason why I'm gushing over Cynthia is because, as most of you know who follow me, I am a pretty go, go, go kind of person. I'm a triple fire on the zodiac. Like, I am full of energy. In the writing world, when I talk about like being a pantser versus a plotter, I am a pantser. I jump in, I'm ready to rock and roll. And it's not often that somebody's technique can really bring me to this calming, grounded place. And Cynthia, your work does that.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
Like, truly, it doesn't happen a lot for me where I can actually
Mm.
quiet my mind and just be. And I would love to hear how mindfulness became a practice in your life. Um, yeah, let's start there.
Hmm. Well, I'm a double water with some earth. And I have a long, winding journey with mindfulness with lots of key points, but I would say some of the like standout moments that really come up for me is I really struggled with anxiety and panic attacks as a teenager. And I was exploring art and I was painting happy trees with Bob Ross at one point. And art has always been a safe haven for me. And I think, like many creatives, whether they're artists, like painters, drawers, writers, whatever their craft is, sometimes we can be our own worst critic. And I learned through the practice of mindfulness that I had a very different practice when I was doing my art without mindfulness included.
Huh.
And once I started integrating mindfulness and having a practice of noticing when I was having inner critical thoughts or judgment or ruminations or comparisonitis, which I like to call it. And when instead I noticed all of that and could name it and not hold on to that judgment part and offer myself more compassion. And I find I typically call it a practice because it is a muscle that I'm constantly coming back to and massaging, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and I find that for myself, the combination of having that foundation of mindfulness, which is really just returning back to the present moment as best you can without that judgment or noticing that judgment and letting it go and coming back again and again. Um, I tend to have a lot of my art practices be similar to a breath meditation. Sometimes I focus on the breath, but instead of only focusing on the breath, I actually use my brush marks or my drawing or painting or writing as the anchor point of the mindfulness meditation. And so it's just freed up so much for me, and it has been a big passion of mine, and then obviously has been a longer path that I went through with different certifications and creating my own teachings and sharing it with others. And it is just a lifesaver for me in so many ways, so I love it.
Yeah, I too, I live with anxiety, and I definitely like I did one of your practices where we did the breathing and then we moved
Mm-hmm.
lines, we drew lines with it. And there was something about like visually seeing it that was awesome. It was like so calming. Um And so I'm curious, how did you begin to develop this practice that you turned into a teacher training to share with everyone?
Mm-hmm. Um, so after I had some of all the anxiety and I started painting, I was treated for cancer back in like 2009, and I discovered at that point I deepened with different practices around art journaling and soul collage and became certified in that practice. I name that only to say that that was a really big catalyst moment for me to make more space for my own creative practice and
Mm.
having a really consistent art practice with mindfulness, and at the time also yoga and meditation. And so it was through having that really consistent practice over a long time that I discovered, not only through other certifications I took, but through my own work, what really resonated. And then it was much longer until now. I usually refer to it as my muse journaling kind of trifecta. It's the foundation of the framework of what I practice and what I teach and what I include in my teacher trainings. And that really is like, I think of it as three overlapping circles. So it's the mindfulness as the foundation, the art practice, being able to express ourselves creatively. Like you mentioned, having a visual outside of ourselves can be a really great anchor point. And then I include different writing prompts, which is to me, I like to think of it as like the secret sauce. And when I was doing that practice, when I was recovering from cancer and then other things in my life that was going on, for me, it wasn't enough to only have the mindfulness and the mark making. It
Yeah.
also was part of an inner inquiry and journey for myself. And so I did that through just writing and writing, but also with different journaling prompts. So it's many years in the making. But yeah, those are kind of the three main points of
Yeah.
what I have for my own practice that's now in my teacher trainings too.
Yeah. And I feel like it definitely stands out because I mean, I have so many, as you do, like inner circle women that we can
Mm-hmm.
like connect with and co-work with and that we're friends with. And I feel like everybody's got their own vibe for those
Yeah.
who teach. And I will say there's something about your practice that is truly so different than anything else I've ever experienced.
Mm.
And maybe it's the secret sauce. It is. It's like why should I even go any further? It's the secret sauce. But I truly like that's what I think is so wild is that it just stands alone in being its own thing. And I really appreciate that because as much as I love being a go-getter and like go, 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 it doesn't serve me to always be in that space, to always be in that energy. And I know that. And yeah, just having that practice to be able to come back and ground myself for someone, well, for anyone. I was going to say for someone like me who feels like busy mind, but that's so many
Mm-hmm.
friends out there in the world. Like, how does someone begin this practice to
Mm-hmm.
begin to start incorporating this in their lives?
I'm a really huge fan and advocate for removing barriers to our mindfulness practice, our creative practice, our passion projects, our teaching projects, because any sort of, so I usually talk about that there's two common blocks that I hear of, that I've experienced, that I talk about with my students. And I usually name them under two umbrellas, which is overwhelm and resistance. And and
I've
so much of
before.
totally, yeah. And so much of that, I think, especially for creatives, with overwhelm, we might have too many ideas. We might not know where to start. We might be concerned that we're going to make the wrong choice. We might have the comparisonitis. We might also have feelings of resistance, of, having imposter syndrome or inner critic, or feeling like, who am I? Or there's so many different things. And so even just talking about it, just naming that as a philosophy that I touch into so often, I can feel it in my body. I can feel my body responding to that. And so, what I like to do is first name all of those things and to identify what are our actual barriers, what's stopping me from creating, from writing, from having, sitting down with a cup of tea and noticing my breath for 3 breaths. And so often I have so many different tools and practices that I use and teach around this, but some of the simplest things that I really advocate for is to get it out of yourself and onto the page. So sometimes that's just, heart storming, getting all of, if you're feeling overwhelmed or you have ideas and stuck, getting it out of you so you can see it on the paper. And I'm a huge advocate as well for the Kaizen Muse method, which was originally, I think, created in Japan with like car manufacturers, and they figured out how to streamline their process and move much more efficiently by having really simple tasks that they could do.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of conversation around it, but basically it's breaking down tasks into like 5 or 15 minute chunks.
Nice.
And I like to think of how can I make whatever this thing is. Let's say I want to start doing a mindful art practice in a journal, but I don't know where to start and I feel overwhelmed and I want to do it for self-care, or I've had a practice and now I want to start teaching and I don't know how to do that. Is to get all of those thoughts out of you onto the page, and also to start making 5 to 15 minute tasks that you can. I like to go for like the low hanging fruit, and
Totally.
start gaining momentum. Everybody has a different, the whole, I hear people say like, eat the frog, go for the biggest one first. Well, if I'm already in a state of overwhelm and resistance, the
Right.
thought of eating the frog or going for that big project, it's just going to freeze me more.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so those are things that I love to mention. And I also have, I don't think we've talked about this yet, but I also have a workbook that people can download that has prompts as well that can guide through. So I'm always happy to share that if you feel like it would be helpful. But there's so many different ways. I think the other thing I'll just say is that it's normal. Like, I think this desire that we have to be creative or to feel less stressed or to pursue a project, that desire, I think that there's a purpose to that, like feeling that in us. And lately I've been thinking a lot about making space for that still small voice in us, to hear that desire, to make space for whatever that thing is. So yeah, I'll stop rambling, but
Oh, I love it.
it's such a great question.
I love it. And I think it's so interesting because I don't do it as much now, but years ago I would always say, well, I don't have time for any kind of self-care things, or I would say like, oh, I don't have time to do this 5 minute, mindfulness activity. But it's so interesting because it's just this kind of toxic loop that we can get
Mm,
stuck in, where we don't make time, the 5 minutes that we can gift ourselves. And because we push through and don't take those 5 minutes, it's almost like it sets us back even
mm,
further with how we feel. I mean, it leads to breakdown or overwhelm or being
mm-hmm,
incredibly stressed out. So it's so wild how we can convince ourselves like we don't have 5 minutes. And I am a big believer, like you, in the power of those small increments of time. And so, what do you say to the person that's like, oh no, if I got the 5 minutes?
I actually am a believer that voice that tells us that I don't have 5 minutes is a very sneaky version of our inner critic, or a part of us that's trying to protect us, right? Because doing that, let's say if we want to do a self-care practice or do a mindful art or drawing practice or writing, I find I actually resist those things the most when I really have something that I want to say, when I really have something that I need to create. And there's this, so that's why I mentioned the resistance as something that can block us.
Yeah.
So usually, like 5 minutes isn't the reason why someone's not creating, because we can all at some point somewhere find 5 minutes, make space for 5 minutes. I can't tell you how much time I still waste on my phone doom scrolling, and I know I'm not alone in that.
You're not.
Um, so time isn't the issue. What I always am curious about, like if you mentioned like what would you say to somebody that said that, I would be really curious what's beneath that, because I think that's different for everybody. And that also could be a really interesting journaling prompt that someone, or even if you're not willing or feeling resistant to write that for 5 minutes, just setting a timer for 30 minutes on your phone and reflecting on that, like what is it really that I'm Like maybe it's that I feel guilt because I have a family that I'm taking care of, or I have too much other responsibilities, and I feel guilty to explore my mindfulness and creativity. Maybe it's that I have absolutely no idea where to start, and I feel overwhelmed at the thought of even like looking up how I could learn something around it. Or I feel like I need to have the right supplies and I don't
Yeah.
have those. There's
Yeah.
so many different reasons. I think that just similar to like naming and noticing what the thought is and then just returning back to our breath or to a practice. I think it's really similar with that. Like that's just the first step, is identifying that likely it's not that you don't have 5 minutes. It's what is it really? And that could be really interesting. And I think that it changes. I know for me and for the students I work with that those reasons change.
Totally.
Um, and I think that there's also really simple, like sometimes I don't know how you are, Sage. Sometimes I feel like I have to go all in on things. Like if I don't have all the supplies and all the training and an hour to do the thing, then it's just not worth it for me to. And so, which again, I would argue is just our inner critic
No,
coming
you're
up. But
right.
um, we don't have to do a big, huge thing.
Mhm.
And that's why I love these really simple, even if we just start with the curiosity of like, oh, isn't that interesting? Why do I think I don't have the 5 minutes?
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly, I'm with you 100%. It's definitely not about the time because yes, we do
Mm-hmm.
doom scroll. That is the thing we do now. And I love this piece about being curious, and it's not inviting judgment in. It's like just
Mm-hmm.
getting curious about, okay, it's not really time. I've got 5 minutes. And I think even the folks with the fullest lives have 5 minutes. So I love that. I love that you said that. It's like a little bit, dig a little bit underneath and see what is actually stopping you. Yeah. Because I used to be that person. I am not that person now. But what I do find is like fear is so much underneath it. For me, it's always like some
Mm-hmm.
fear of something. Fear is always the culprit that's like under the pile when I start digging. And I'm like, oh, it's a fear of this or a fear of that. And so now I understand it. It doesn't mean that I don't fall into the trap. I just don't like stay there and not do the thing because I like understand a little bit more now, but it was definitely a process. So I'm so glad that you're like, yes, it's actually not
Mm-hmm.
time. It is something underneath. So for people who are like, this sounds amazing. I want to do this transformative 5 minute mindfulness activity. How can they work with you?
Mm-hmm. So there's a few different ways. The best way really is to go to my website, which is mindfulcreativemuse.com. And on there, I have a resources page that has a lot of free videos and podcasts. You can find information. My courses and teacher trainings are there. And then also the workbook. I can always share that link in the workbook. It includes like 10 different prompts for people to get started really easily. So that's probably the best way if people are wanting, like, I just want to simply dive in. That would be kind of my best recommendation. Yeah.
And I've got a special treat where
Mm-hmm.
I am hosting you in my community to lead one of these magical workshops. Will you tell us about this magical workshop? It's going to happen on September 11th. So, everything that we're talking about, Cynthia's gems, her website, this workshop, all of the links are going to be in the description of the podcast. So, no worries, we've got you set up. But tell us about this magical workshop, Cynthia.
Yes. So this workshop is called Art as Meditation, and it's 60 minutes long. And I'm going to be sharing more of kind of what we're talking about, like what can kind of block us and get in the way, as well as we'll actually be going through some really simple, all 5 minute chunked practices with mindfulness and drawing, some with the breath, some that you can do literally with just a pen and paper, others that you can have more supplies if you want to have color to it. And so it's things that you can take with you after the workshop and do like during your lunch break at work or first thing in the morning or right before you do a writing or art practice if you have a longer practice. So there's some of my go-to practices that I use when I'm feeling stuck, when I just want to get started, when I want to kind of break through into a new creative space. So I'm so excited to share them and to connect with you and your community. Yeah.
Yeah, I am super stoked too. And I'm totally encouraging folks to go to your website, sign up for the workbook that you have with the journal prompts, and so that they can stay connected with you. And also come to the workshop because it is free. It is Cynthia's gift. It's amazing. And then you can try out this practice real time with Cynthia. Like what better way to try it out was real time with Cynthia. So is there anything we didn't talk about around mindfulness that you feel like saying before we close this party up, Cynthia? Is there anything you want to speak into? No peer
Mm.
pressure.
I
No
love
peer
that question.
pressure.
Hmm. You know, I was having a conversation with a friend just yesterday, and we were talking. I've known them. I used to volunteer at a yoga and meditation center years ago for a year, and I met them in that community there. And so they're one of my mindful creative friends that I like chat with, and we have our, little connection around things. And we were talking about when we are on, our creative path and we feel like we're just lost a little bit or seeking or wandering, and that space of like, you know, maybe somebody has had a practice with writing or drawing or painting and they're off of their practice right now. Or I know you have your book in 90 program and support people, guiding them through like writing and publishing their book. And maybe people have had ideas for a long time, that are stuck. And we were just having this really interesting chat around that part of when we get to a place of we feel stuck or we're seeking or we're wandering, that also is part of the path still. I just think about seasons with nature, and there's these seasons of turning inward and then of really producing and creating outward. And so I just like to name that when it comes to mindfulness, because I think a huge part about mindfulness, especially tied into a creative practice, is that we're not pushing away whatever our experience is. So if we are feeling stuck or resistant, or if we are feeling really excited and lit up and making lots of progress, we're not labeling those as good or bad. It's more of just like oh, isn't that interesting? And then having it be another, like a friend or a companion that's just kind of along with you, helping to notice things. So that's just fresh on my mind because we had that conversation yesterday. So that's the only other thing I would add.
I love it. And because, as human beings and the different life experiences that we have, when we show up to any kind of practice, it may impact us in a different way based on what we're bringing in that
Mm-hmm.
moment, that energy. I used to take these yoga classes with a wonderful woman, and she would remind us, like, you may do this routine day after day, but there may be one day that you come in and you don't stretch as far as you did maybe the day before. Like, your body is different all the time. And I think about that now, just in different areas of my life, how sometimes when I sit down to write, it flows, and other times it feels a little trickier. So I agree, it's like part of this process that we're all in, and it looks differently. And I really love to say out loud, grab be with Cynthia in whatever way you want to with this practice, because it is an amazing pairing to do before working on a painting or writing in your book. Like, what a beautiful practice to have before you sit down for that creative flow.
Mm-hmm.
We're teaming up,
Thank you.
Cynthia. That's it. We're
I
teaming
love
up.
it. Well, and what I love about that too is that before I had kind of that mindset around, it's not good or bad, I'm not pushing it away, I would have stints where I could get derailed from my practice. You know what I mean? Because if you like you use the idea of, or the example of the yoga practice, and there's so many people I know and I've also experienced, if I have a physical practice and then, I set goals around exercise, and then if I don't do those things, and then so I think also having this reframing helps. It just helps to like have a wider container to keep us on that path still, versus getting derailed and then it's 3 months or 6 months or a year or 10 years or whatever, just not doing things that help and support your self-care and your heart and so many wonderful things. So
Yeah, so true. So true. Thank you, friend, for spending some time with us and sharing about your mindfulness journey and how your practice came about, and for coming into my community on September 11th to host your beautiful workshop. I am so looking forward to it.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much. I loved our chat and I'm looking forward to that too.
Yay. Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, friends, check all the links out, and I will see you on September 11th at the workshop. All right. Bye, everyone.